Nice.
Yeah.
Hey, we can hear you.
Cool.
Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
The spaces are great. The one downside about the spaces, though, is there's no screen sharing. So what we've been doing is we've been sharing a Zoom link that in the stage chat that people can follow if we want to do screen share. Do you guys want to screen share anything today? It's not required, but wanted to give you that option if you want to, so we can get it set up.
I don't have anything to share right now. If something comes up that we'd like to share, maybe we could do it.
Cool.
Okay, well, we're a few minutes past the hour, so I think it behooves us to just start. And if there's anyone else, Greg or Adam, on your team as we get going that you want to have up here, just let us know. We're happy to get them up on the stage. But we at the ShapeShift DAO have been in some chats with the Akash team here and looking at potential ways that the DAO might be able to use Akash moving forward. And we're just happy to have them here on the stage to kind of talk more about their project and what potential collaborations might look like. So Greg and Adam, do you want to start just by introducing yourself and then maybe give a brief, high-level overview to everybody about what Akash is?
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, well, my name is Greg Osuri. I'm the founder of Akash. My background, I build things for people that build things. I've been a developer by trade, and last I would say 13 years or so, I've been building developer tooling. Founded Angel Hack, a company to take hackathons to masses. Helped launch several companies there. The most notable one being Firebase, and which eventually got acquired by Google. And that's really where I found passion to help developers in their most challenging part of the development process, which happens to be deployment. And founded Overclock Labs, the company that created founded Akash Network to solve this deployment problem. And as we were deploying our own solution to multiple data centers, that's when we discovered a big inefficiency, which is unused compute capacity. Our estimates put around 85% of compute capacity in these data centers remain unused. That's when the idea for a open market came about. And Akash Network, in simple terms, it's an open market for unused cloud compute, and it takes a developer-first approach, and it provides a price point that is set by a developer, and it does so in a permissionless and a self-solved manner.
Yeah, awesome. I'm Adam Bosnich, co-founder CTO of Akash. Previous lives, I was just engineer in many Silicon Valley or Bay Area startups, really. One of them went on to become Apple Music, and there are some other things. I've been chugging along on Akash Network for some time now. Like Greg said, we are developers, and we're frustrated with our options for deploying. When we're working with these companies, we felt like there were too many resources being dedicated to DevOps instead of building actual products. So that's what we set out to solve. And in the process, as Greg said, we discovered that an open marketplace really has a lot of power, and also that there is so much capacity and so many options out there, aside from like the big cloud providers that are just untapped right now, and there's just too much friction in that marketplace. And there isn't a marketplace for it, and so we set out to open that up. What Akash is today. We launched the platform in March, and we've seen steady growth, and we're just really excited to talk with you guys about how you may be able to use some of our cloud, our decentralized cloud that we're.
Thank you both for the intros. I'll go ahead and set some of the stage too, some of the context for how we might be able to use Akash. So for any of you who saw the engineering demo last week of the new open source architecture, you saw that the main idea with this new architecture is to remove ShapeShift servers from the equation. Currently, the traditional way that a lot of Web 2 or apps like ShapeShift work is they operate servers in a data center like AWS. So Amazon operates the servers and serve all the data to end users. But for this decentralized ShapeShift that we're building, we want to figure out a way where basically anybody can run the nodes, anyone can run the front end, and basically connect this front end to any node provider, including nodes that they operate themselves, and potentially have a network around this where individuals are incentivized with Fox or maybe Akash tokens somehow incentivized to basically run these nodes and run the blockchains for users, so that users don't have to. And possibly we could do this in a way where the providers are incentivized to do this in a good way and provide good data, and punished if they tried to provide bad data. So we're still figuring out exactly how that will work. But one thing's for sure is that we don't want to just have it be run by ShapeShift servers, servers on AWS as ShapeShift operates. And Akash network as the decentralized cloud network is definitely a potential candidate for helping us solve this challenge. So we thought it made a ton of sense to invite them onto the stage so we could learn more about Akash and open it up to the community to get to know them and ask questions. So one question that I'm sure you guys get a lot that I think helped me really understand Akash, or maybe I don't understand Akash and you can help me out here, is around, have you guys, I'm sure you get this a lot, but is it fair to say that Akash is basically like the real life Pied Piper for anyone who's watched Silicon Valley?
Honestly, I had to stop watching Silicon Valley because it was it was just too close to home. So Greg can answer that one better, but I'll say that you could think of it from a developer's perspective as it's a container deployment platform. So the configuration file is very similar to like a Docker Compose file, and we try to make it such that if you have some containers that you want to deploy, it's pretty easy to do that, and that's basically the goal of our thing. Now, of course, there's a lot of plumbing. Decentralized system. There's some concepts to grasp to really understand it, but at first blush, container deployment platform.
Yeah, in the simplest, to extend what Adam said, in the simplest sense, the closest comparison to Akash is Amazon Fargate with Docker Compose, right? So we took a very developer-first approach. So essentially, if you're developing something locally, ideally using Docker Compose, with very little changes to the compose file, you can deploy onto Akash. So we focused on this amazing experience that's optimized for really the development workflow, right? At a price point that's determined by the market. So right now, depending on the kind of workload, you can get up to maybe 1/3 to half the cost that you would pay on Amazon. And it's fully open source, right? There's no and it's permissionless. There's no one stopping you from using Akash, and you can extend the system in whatever way you choose to optimize your own workflow or customize your own workflow. It's very, very free form in that way. Yeah, and it is so it does kind of have its reminiscence to Pied Piper for sure. Except we're not doing any VR stuff soon.
Better logo too, I'd say. Cool.
Yeah,
I think that's
better.
That's something that was really interesting to me about Akash. Was the cost savings. I think a lot of people assume that there's a trade-off between cost and decentralization, and typically more expensive to do things in a more decentralized way. But can you speak to the cost savings and if you think that will be sustainable, or is that just something that has to do with this being the early stages of the network?
So it's interesting, and I think, so just on the fact that we do have a lot more supply that's underutilized than demand tells us the costs are always going to be lower. There are about 8.4 million data centers, and 85% of which, the capacity in which 85% or so is not used, right? So optimistically, I think the cost is always going to be lower because as we get more demand, the supply is going to catch on, and we're kind of seeing that, right? But the consistency of cost differs based on demand supply. So originally, when we began Akash, when we launched Akash, the savings were somewhere north of 1/8 the cost of cloud. Now it's half to maybe 1/3, and that's because every time you have, an exchange or a market that's new that has a decent amount of spread from other markets, you're always going to have arbitrageurs come and take. So we have quite a few miners, that that are on Akash right now really arbitraging compute. Arbitraging compute is essentially mining, right? So mining for low and selling it at a higher cost. So, but miners, the arbitrages are also add efficiency to market. So you can't really say they're a good thing or a bad thing. I think in the long run they're a good thing because they tend to give you the true price. So to answer your question, is the cost saving going to be forever? I think they will be, and I think it really comes down to the true price of the cloud versus cheaper cloud. Right now it's great. So and we have the kind of supply we have in the pipeline indicate as well the cost is going to be lower for a good period of time.
That's awesome. Very cool. And what about performance? Are there any trade-offs when it comes to performance, or is it just as fast as if you were to go with AWS, for example?
So
yes, again, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, I'll
Go on, Adam.
speak real quick. Also, this relates to the last question. The vision of Akash, and actually the reality of it a bit, is that there's a wide range of compute resources available, right? So all these data centers in the world have their different, their different secret sauce or their different kinds of advantages to use. And the goal is with Akash is to open up that market so that consumers can use them. And so with the different performances or different features, fast storage, this, that, or different services, managed databases, there comes with those things comes a different, let's say, price premium or price actually. And so there is this broad range. And so it's hard to say like Akash is more performant because really we encompass this wide range of capabilities. Yes, absolutely. Like we are not using VMs, we're using Docker containers, and so there's a huge performance benefit from doing that, from being on bare metal. So in general, especially right now, we see performances that are much higher. Like if you do a comparison of 10 CPU on Akash on some particular providers versus 10 CPU on AWS, the price performance is like way higher, right? And so yes, right now, absolutely, we're more performant, we're less expensive. I just want to make clear that going forward, in fact, it'll be a more healthy ecosystem when there's a wide range of options. When I run a CI job, I don't need the top-end server. There's a top-end server that will be around forever. I don't mind if it's on a lower-end server that might not be up all the time. And so if I don't mind that it's on a lower-end server that might not be up all the time, that opens up an opportunity for somebody that has some extra servers during the daytime because their servers aren't hot then, to lease out those resources during the day only, right? And any amount of income that they generate during that time is a positive for them because it's sitting idle right now. And so that's how it makes it, that allows the system to be less expensive. But really, and so there is, I just want to make clear, like, it would be easy for me to say, like, yes, we're always less expensive. But the reality is that there is this broad range, and we can be more performant. We are more performant now. But I just want to underscore that point about there being a broad ecosystem of resources available.
Yeah, to add to Adam's point, the way you think of Akash, I mean, not to sound cheesy, but it's really like Airbnb for compute versus something like Amazon, which is Hilton, right? Like Hilton, you get this consistent performance, consistent service, and similar costs. Pretty much any Hilton you go to. But Airbnb, you get a variety of services, right? You could get a single bedroom shack, or you can get like a 10-bedroom, villa. It's up to you. Akash is about opening up those options and giving you a broader choice as a consumer of cloud. So that means you get a very different. Definitely, I would think you have better price performance just on the fact that there's a lot more supply we're tapping into. But it really varies. So far, most of the compute on Akash is bare metal. So you're obviously going to have a lot better performance, but there's no guarantee. It's up to the individual developer, individual machine or provider that you choose.
Love the Airbnb analogy. Thank you guys. This is helping me understand Akash much better. And it reminds me, like, I could see Akash being the Airbnbs and the data centers being kind of like the hotels, but also, hotels that can also rent out their unused hotel rooms to Airbnb and tap into this global network. So it's cool that there's the whole spectrum too. You can get, it seems much more efficient if you're able to get lower performant compute for cheaper, or if you need really high performant compute, then you can pay for that as well and get that all in one place.
Yeah, one question I think I'd love to hear you both speak on is one of the ways that I originally found out about Akash and got me interested in before I even understood what it was, is that you all are part of the kind of Cosmos and IBC community. And I'd love to just hear a little bit more about what design decisions went into you all using the Cosmos SDK and what benefits you've seen from kind of being part of that ecosystem.
Great. So I'll probably open up and Adam can go deeper into it. So we've been developing the core tech behind Akash since 2015, right? So when we founded Overclock Labs, a lot of the container stuff, a lot of the Kubernetes and scheduling stuff came from that era, and we've been developing in Go. And in 2016, 2017, we were dabbling around the idea of using a blockchain as the foundation for the marketplace. And we initially went with prototyping with Ethereum, and that CryptoKitties launched during that time, and I think about 40,000 users on CryptoKitties crashed the entire system for us. So Ethereum wasn't very viable, and then we learned even a shared security model is not exactly viable for something as high performant as Akash, right? And then we went with a sovereign model. For sovereign model, the options were very, very limited. And back then, Tendermint was very appealing for us because this is before Cosmos SDK existed. Tendermint was written in Go, and it was a library format, so you can just pretty much drop in the library and get the hard problem solved. It was not complete, but since it was written in Go, that was pretty good for us because we can go in and fix any problems we see, and it's part of our core stack, right? So the decisions that went in really were number one, can we work on it in case we get into trouble? Number two, is there a larger community that is contributing towards this package that we can leverage, right? And also Tendermint, looking at the pattern, it had very similarities with Kubernetes or Docker community. So there are a lot of users dabbling with it, trying different things. Even though it wasn't perfect, people were contributing, and there's a lot of progress being made. We really like that part of the ecosystem. So all these put in together, it was very appealing. We initially began with Tendermint, but we kind of ended up developing all the modules. The Cosmos SDK eventually became ourselves. So in 2017, so it wasn't production ready, and we had a bunch of testnets out in 2018 and 2019 timeframe that really didn't scale that very well. And in 2020 or I would say end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we decided to get rid of all the code. I remember Adam deleting 120,000 lines of code. It was very painful. All these custom modules we wrote on top of Tendermint to get out the functionality like banking or staking and all that, right? Away, and we chose Cosmos SDK because these modules are developed and tested, and there's a lot more public scrutiny than versus the stuff that we have developed, right? So for us, less code is always better, less attack surface in general. Contrary to the lines of code that people count in blockchain, which is stupid. Anyway, so for us, just maintaining writing less code and using more shared code that has better auditing, that has more public scrutiny, and that fits into our architecture. And it ended up being the right choice looking back, because now we have a highly performance system. It never goes down, really, for the most part. The ecosystem is amazingly growing. And with IBC, we have the cross chain or interchain composability, and composability is getting much better and better. I think the general Cosmos ecosystem has stronger developers because a lot of these developers, a lot of these chains have to bootstrap, right? Bootstrap security, and bootstrapping security means getting an approval from the community and getting the buy-in from the community, the validator community, especially, which is a fairly technical community. So, and they ended up being our users as well. So it's just a lot of mutual value add that we could provide each other being Cosmos.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it from my perspective as well. I just underscore the part about we wanted to build an isolated system, not have it be dominated by other applications that are running. We want our one performance system that we need to worry about, just kind of engineering first principles. What we missed out on by making the decision originally to go with Tendermint was being able to leverage an ecosystem. That's what you get in ERC20 tokens and things like that. But the vision for Cosmos and Tendermint was always to have IBC, and they delivered on that. And so now we get the best of both worlds. We have this our own isolated system that's performant, and we can connect with other chains. Right now we're on various dexes in the Cosmos ecosystem. We're going to start being able to do smart contracts from one chain that controls your deployments on Akash, and it's just going to be, I feel like it's going to be a booming of features that are going to be coming out of the Cosmos ecosystem that we're going to be participating in. So yeah, I also am really happy that this choice.
And also, when it comes to ecosystem and isolation, right? Yes, sovereignty is great because we get to control our destiny when it comes to costs, be it gas costs, be it scalability and whatnot. But also presents a challenge because we have to, we're responsible for our own security, right? Whereas the shared security model, be it Ethereum, be it Solana, and other blockchains, you get to leverage the community, especially the ecosystem, when it comes to things that are obvious, which is liquidity and exchange listings. It's easier to be an ERC20 token and leverage that, but you're going to compromise usability. So the choice was usability versus liquidity. We obviously chose usability, playing out the long game, that liquidity will catch up as long as we build good products. And I think we're very proud of the decision.
That's a great answer. Cool to see so many benefits from building on top of that Cosmos ecosystem. I know one relevant one too is that I see you guys on the Osmosis Dex. We had a community call with them recently, and there's a proposal passed, and an integration with Osmosis is currently in progress, and that should pave the way for ShapeShift users to be able to trade for Akash and provide Akash liquidity on Osmosis Dex, which is one of the benefits you get from being an IBC-enabled chain. And is it true, another one that we might get is the ability for, if we were to use Akash, to pay these data providers with Fox tokens, if Fox was IBC enabled?
Yes, that's another exciting part of IBC. You should be able to write a wrapper on top of Akash that will allow acceptance of Fox tokens on the deployment create function, or you could even do other type of sidecar architectures. There's a few things you can do to enable payment using Fox, and Akash also supports an escrow type payment. So essentially, the payment account could be different from the operational account, or the funding account. So you can actually fund using IBC, using Osmosis, for example. There's a market for Akash and Fox token. You can do the swap and fund your account using the swap tokens, and fully permissionless in a decentralized way.
Fox, yeah. I want to open it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions they want to ask the Akash team, raise your hand. We'll pull you up, or you can also post them in the stage chat, and we can read it for you. John, do you have any questions in the meantime?
That was my immediate question. I guess maybe just as we're waiting, it looks like actually here Michael's up here, and we've got a few others ready to ask questions. So I'll cede to them before I ask anything else. Go ahead, Michael.
Thanks. I would have put up my hand, but it doesn't allow you to put up a hand when you're a mod. I'd like to ask a question that we actually spoke about before when we were chatting about Akash a couple of weeks ago, but I think it's important for the community to hear the answer. So I'm going to ask it again in this more public forum. When it comes to the security of applications and the and assurances to the project that is hosting or that is seeking hosting through Akash, are there any guarantees or any ways that Akash is able to provide those types of guarantees? To ask the question in another way, using your Airbnb example, if I'm matched with a big house, a small house, a good house, a bad house, it's the biggest effect to me would be, well, I'm having a poor experience for a week. But when we are, and when I use we, I mean the ShapeShift DAO, when the ShapeShift DAO is looking to host our code on a variety of decentralized servers, we want to make sure that when anybody in the audience is going to visit ShapeShift and use the ShapeShift interface, the addresses that are being shown to them are their own, and the data that's being shown to them is accurate. Because in the cryptocurrency world, if the Akash host, or well, I guess if the server host modifies the data that's being sent to one of the users could end up losing funds. So there's much higher stakes than what you would find in Airbnb. So I'd like you guys to talk a little bit about the guarantees that when ShapeShift as a project goes to find a host on Akash and gives it to a server operator, how can everybody be sure that it's legitimate ShapeShift code being run and it hasn't been modified in any way?
Sure, I'll take that one. So we have facilities on chain to model exactly what we do every day when we're trusting cloud providers. So when you deploy to DigitalOcean or to Linode or to AWS, you trust that they're not interfering with your code. They're running your code as you sent it to them, and that trust metric is able to be encoded on chain on Akash. So we have something called the concept of an auditor. Okay, and this is a decentralized thing, so anybody can become an auditor, and an auditor can use whatever mechanisms that they use. It's actually an area that we'd like to see a lot of more work in, but they could essentially sign off on or vouch for providers. So right now, we have providers that we work very closely with, Equinix Metal, for instance, and we vouch for them as being good players. We vouch for the veracity of the data that comes off of the systems that are being hosted through Akash on the system. And what you can do is you can say, when you're creating a deployment, part of that SDL file I was talking about earlier, that's like a Docker Compose file, you can say, hey, I only want to accept bids, or I only want to deploy to providers who've been audited or signed off by this particular key. And so, for instance, right now, all of our documentation that we have to just get people started, that portion is filled out with the Akash Teams key. is we bless providers that we work closely with. So that's the answer right now. Of course, in the future,
I could ask a follow-up. Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let me also add to it, right? So there are no guarantees, right? There are no guarantees that it's coming from a server. The best is you can do using auditor attributes, which is also an optional feature. Best you could do is establish identity and establish some sort of like trust through association, right? So, but the absolute way, or really, is to be redundant when it comes to the source, right? So one way is you can spread the deployments into multiple clusters and use a combination of auditor attributes or non-auditor attributes, doesn't really matter, to just de-risk a single source of truth, right? So that means the client has to implement some sort of a integrity check, right? Um, and or even the auditor attributes is more of a sort of like get into this like blessed in the sense like Overclock Labs, which is a company that contributes to Akash Network and a company that people know could become an auditor. Right now, it's an auditor, but there are other auditors in the network that could verify an identity of a provider, just like you would do on Airbnb. Now that doesn't that solves and minimizes trust to a lower level, but there's still no guarantees. There's still no guarantees. Like today, if you're deploying on Amazon, that Amazon is the one who's serving, right? So just like it's a hard problem, and the solution is redundancy, resilience through redundancy, essentially.
I would also say
I think both of you brought up.
Let me just say real quick that whether you're on Akash or not, if it really that what we've been describing is puts us on par with what you should trust, the trust level of the DigitalOcean world. That. But if you're really worried about people, about people displaying incorrect addresses, that's really a solution. That's really a problem for the application, right? You could use digital signatures. PGP's been around for however many years, 30 years, and 40 years, and so like it's another level up. That's an application level thing that kind of can be solved that way as well.
I think that both of you brought up really great points. On the one hand, trust is still required, even though this is a decentralized system. And it is up to a well secured application requires validation and verification on the client side. I'm hoping that some of our engineers in the audience, because we have been talking about the idea of moving a lot of the heavy lifting from ShapeShift's current server architecture into the client, so that the client is able to validate these things. If these Bitcoin addresses are only ever retrieved by the client and there's no crosstalk back and forth to the server never even has an opportunity to give one of our users a bad address. And I think that is absolutely the right way to go by architecting the application securely instead of relying on it. But when it comes to the trust piece that you mentioned, I see how you like today you have to trust AWS, or you have to trust DigitalOcean, or whoever you are paying to host your server today. And in this Akash system, there are these auditors who can bless certain servers and say, hey, I trust that person. But right now, if somebody at DigitalOcean or somebody at Amazon decides to screw with the data and be malicious, I, as a customer, can hold my contract with AWS or hold my contract with DigitalOcean to them and say, hey, you are violating this contract, and there's an opportunity for recourse. But when we're dealing with a DAO, where at some point ShapeShift will not have a formal entity, and the server that we might be linked up with via Akash that's hosting the ShapeShift data, they may not even be an entity either. If they do decide to be a bad actor there's very little recourse that either the ShapeShift DAO or this other host could reach. Now, reputation is very important, and these auditors you spoke of, who can sort of bless other people and say, "Hey, I've reviewed that other server, and I'm putting my reputation behind them." But that just seems like, for us as users, for the DAO as users, right now we only really have to validate the host that we're dealing with. We have to validate AWS, or we have to trust AWS. But in Akash, we not only have to trust the specific bare metal host we've been matched with, we now also have to vet these auditors and trust them. It almost seems like it's making more people involved. I just wanted to highlight that, but I've taken too much of the stage
I'll
time.
say that. No, that's a fair point. I think that's a very fair point. I'd say just we can snip off half of that though, right? Because as you said, if you're going to become a DAO, then you don't even be an entity to get angry with AWS for, right? So that part of the discussion, I think we can off because that's also on par with Akash. I think the second part, I think, is totally fair, and these auditors, right? I think the reality of the situation is going to end up being that Equinix Metal is going to be an auditor for themselves, right? And so when you use them, they will bless themselves, and they're. I think we need to do some work on defining the kind of legal ramifications and what all this stuff means. But I think at the end of the day, that it's gonna, the way it flush out is it won't be too different from if you want, it won't necessarily be too different from the situation as it. In fact, so one model for these auditors, for to incentivize auditors to be a thing in the first place, is that if I use an auditor's key, so I say I'm only going to deploy to providers that you've signed off on, it could be a revenue generator. Like the auditor can then make a deal with the provider and get income for being an auditor. So this is an area that we really need to develop a lot more. But I don't think that Akash, the Akash system precludes the kind of legal ramifications that you're wanting. And I think it's a reasonable thing to request.
And also,
I love the crazy things that we are running into as a DAO. These are amazing problems that are quite difficult to solve, and I'm glad that there's a team like yours working towards it.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a very important point, right? If you're a DAO, what's the recourse to Amazon? Like a DAO can't sue Amazon, or they can, I don't know.
Well,
right?
no,
like,
but a DAO could pay me as an individual, and Michael can enter into a hosting contract with Amazon. So now Michael can sue Amazon on behalf of the DAO if I choose.
I see. Okay, but you're still exposing Michael as a member of the DAO, if that's something.
That's right. I don't think any solution has ever been arrived at to this problem. We may actually be one of the very first entities to run into this problem, being the first centralized entity that is decentralizing. These problems are the ones that I find absolutely fascinating and keeps me engaged with ShapeShift even after my formal employment will end with them.
Yeah, no, it's interesting stuff. Really, this whole concept of like, how do I trust things, has been something that we've struggled with since the beginning. We get a lot of questions about, especially being in the blockchain space. Not so much anymore, but I think before there was a more mature market, people were like, "Why are you verified?" Can you verify? No, we're like getting things done. Compute, and so it's something that we've struggled with for a long time. We tinkered with the idea of putting a reputation kind of metric on chain, but the reality is that our metric may be different from somebody else's metric, from somebody else's. So that doesn't make much sense. We leave the system open so that other people can define their own trust metrics, and that's again part of this area that we'd really going to be pushing on to develop this auditor network that utilizes those things. But yeah, super hard problems is super interesting stuff. I think in the case that you're talking about, I agree with you that doing verification via digital signatures and things like that on the client side is very valuable. And for the rest of the things that can be just serving up images and HTML and all that stuff, maybe the digital signatures aren't as necessary, or maybe they are. But either way, you're going to need a lot of compute, and that's what Akash is here for.
Next question.
Awesome. Thanks for the great question, Michael, and the Kosh team for the in-depth answer. Seth, I think you were next, and then we'll get to Highlander and Mr. Nerd here.
Hey guys, I have a very practical question. So, ShapeShift is currently using Amazon Web Services, as most websites are these days. So my question is, how difficult is it to transition from Amazon Web Services to Akash? I imagine this is something you guys have to deal with routinely. I'm just wondering how much of a hurdle it is.
What we found experience to be fairly straightforward, especially if you're someone that uses Docker Compose. So we essentially use the same container that you deploy on Amazon, assuming you're running containers and not running a VM. And and the configuration file is very familiar if you know how to use Docker, basically.
Okay, great. My second question is that if you can get such a big performance benefit from using Docker as opposed to full-on virtual machines, why isn't the competition doing that? I imagine there's some sort of trade-off.
They're doing. Everybody's running containers. I mean, you can run containers on Amazon. So Amazon they use, so you can run containers on a bare metal, or you can run containers on a virtual machine, right? So VMs are easier to manage as a provider because you can package them the way you want them. But the trade-off is they have higher overhead, right? Because every VM you're running a full-on kernel itself, whereas containers you're sharing the kernel, right? So for example, if you have a 200 gigabyte box, and if you want to break that into, let's say, 100 machines using a VM, you're basically only getting 100 1 gigabyte machines, because 1 gigabyte you're giving to virtual machine to the kernel, right? So you're using 100 gigs to the kernel, versus if you're running a container-based system, you're just using probably 1 gig for the kernel, and you're getting 199 gigabytes out of it. So you get more bang for your buck using containers on bare metal versus containers on VM. So why doesn't the competition use it? Because it's a huge infrastructure to build. If you're someone like Amazon, it's your entire existence is based on a hypervisor, which is underlying technology for VMs. You're not going to change them overnight. And the demand for VMs is probably higher, especially if you're coming from a traditional, like, non-cloud native world, right? So there are a lot of factors. I think it's mostly practical factors.
Okay, so it's a classic performance versus convenience trade-off.
Yeah, performance versus convenience. So. Convenience plus. I don't know if it's convenience or it's legacy. I feel like it's performance versus. And so a lot of the new development style is to use containers, right? It's relatively new, not super new, but it's basically mainstream now. It's the way that we develop applications. We try to make them small. We try to make them, single function, single purpose. That is somewhat new. Now imagine how much software existed before that. It's a lot, and all that stuff. And so, just to get back to your question about like migrating services over and things like that, we do run into some issues sometimes where people are running like giant Java applications that generally run on a VM, and it's not really containerized yet, and all that stuff. There's some friction there, but there's going to be friction there for that team, whether or not they go to Akash or not. The friction is really containerizing your application, not like deploying on Akash versus somewhere else. So yeah.
All right,
I
so
was just gonna
it seems
throw
like.
in here.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to throw in from ShapeShift's perspective in terms of a migration. So the V2 platform that we're building, the back end for it, which is called Unchained, probably the only candidate for this in our early stages here, is already all set up to run in containers. So the hope would be anyone that's operating one of these would be able to have Akash as an option to host the backend. Current ShapeShift centralized is also everything's containerized. That's definitely the way things are going. Outside of very specialized cases, you probably opt towards containers for just about any new development.
Cool. Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, and agreed about. I was actually skeptic for a while. I wanted to just run servers, but man, it is the tooling around container administration and deployments and everything is just makes life so much easier.
Small
Okay,
investment goes a long way.
Yeah, so it seems like when Amazon Web Services became dominant, VMs were the primary MO, and then containers became more popular, and because you guys are newer, you built that infrastructure ahead of time. So you guys are in a better position because of that. Is that right?
Yeah, and just to be clear, like Amazon offers container services. It's just that it's not just the actual applications. There's the legacy applications. There's the legacy documentation. There's the legacy mindset, and just comfort.
Oh, I'm well
level.
aware.
Yeah.
Fortran is still being used today.
Yeah.
You know,
100%. Yeah,
for the
COBOL.
legacy code for 50 years ago. So
Yeah, exactly.
that
So
is.
it's that. Yeah, exactly.
So
Well,
I would
you gotta
expect this.
understand a lot of.
But I'll also say too, when you go on Amazon, like if you're gonna get a EKS thing or something like that, you lease out the VMs and then you put containers on, right? So there's still like, there's still that kind of, it's still with us when we use AWS. With us, we're just kind of starting fresh with container native, container.
Okay. A user X-Wing asks what I think is a very good question of what happens if there's illegal or objectionable data on one of your servers? What happens in that situation?
I'm sorry, could you expand on the question? Like, what's objectionable data?
Well, I think what the question's getting at is sort of what happens. There's plenty of websites that do illegal stuff, right? So what happens if one of those websites is hosted on your network?
Oh, I see. So, I mean, there is no censorship on Akash, and providers are ultimately responsible for the content. Now, I mean, most providers, I think, have developed a mechanism to battle illegal content. This has been a problem that's it's been rampant for a long time, right? So the providers will self-moderate. So it really comes down to the type of content, and if it's something like not all content is bad, right? If something really, really bad, like child pornography or something really crazy, yeah, most providers don't want to host that. So they can choose to who to host, right? As long as there's a single provider that's willing to host the content, it'll work. Akash will work. But if there are no providers willing to host content, it won't work. So it really comes down to the type of content, I think. And if something like Parler, right, where Amazon rejected, but if Parler was hosted on Akash, as long as there's a single server that's willing to host Parler, it should work, right? So it's the approach Akash takes for censorship is essentially Akash doesn't provide tools or anything to censor somebody, but providers can have the full liberty to choose who they serve, and you have the freedom of speech, but the right to listen is up to me, right? So Akash takes a very hands-off approach when it comes to censorship. The protocol doesn't really do any censorship.
All right, so yeah, that's how you get your censorship resistance. Akash network doesn't have a stance; it's the providers themselves.
Yeah. So as
Yeah,
long
we
as there's a
have
provider willing to
no-
serve you content,
Yeah.
Hey guys,
But there are no
we
providers.
only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we get to some of the other questions. But thank you for the great questions, Seth. Highlander, I think you were next in line.
Yeah. So I was going to say this all sounds really great. I'm looking through your docs now. I'm seeing a guide of how to use an EKS to sell your compute, and that is kind of interesting for if you have extra compute. But we're definitely Kubernetes heavy. We're not Compose. I'm looking for any kind of guides or documentations for how we could basically expand a already built Kubernetes cluster into Akash and basically autoscale into it. Could you point me to some documentation or some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So just to be clear, we rely heavily on Kubernetes in the backend as well. We're familiar with that. I think that if you think of it as a pod spec, the deploy.yaml, it would start to make more sense. But I don't know if we have anything specifically about migrating a Kubernetes deployment to one of our SDL files. I think that'd be a great addition for us, and we'd be happy to work with you to look into that and maybe document some of it along the way so that we'll share.
Okay. And maybe my follow-up with that is we have a lot of really large volumes. Anybody that's tried to run a Geth archive node knows that one, it's huge, and two, it's fragile, and it takes a lot of time to spin up and spin down. Is there anywhere to guarantee us spin down time on a node before we get kicked off? I know we've had issues corrupting volumes in the past when we've used our EC2 marketplace.
Right.
Have you messed with that much?
Yeah, so that's going to come down to the auditor that you're using because they'll point to provide. So there's attributes for providers. So the providers will have whatever attribute. It's not like it's just a blanket whitelist. There's actually attributes that providers have that auditors sign off on. And so if a provider is advertising long-term storage or a cooldown, guaranteed cooldown period, and you want that guaranteed by an auditor, then that's something that you can put into the deployment. I'll say though, right now, being such a young system, we basically the providers that we're working closely with basically just keep the damn things up all the time. So there's not an issue, but I think that that's a really important use case that you're describing. We're adding persistent storage right now in our next network upgrade. We're going to be adding persistent storage to support things like ETH nodes. And that might be something that we would consider either next or in conjunction with. And actually, these are all great feature and documentation requests, and I'd love to. I'll capture them myself, but we'd love to hear you guys' ideas. If you please do reach out to us on our Discord or on our forum. You guys are our people. We're out in crypto trying to make a new reality. So we want to support you, and I think you guys have great questions, feature requests.
Yeah, I joined your Discord. I'll keep an eye on it. I guess maybe the first thing we do is maybe a web server deployment or something light.
Cool.
Great. Well, I know we're at the top of the hour, but we got a few more questions, Greg and Adam, if you don't mind staying a few extra minutes, but if you have to go, we'll understand. Mr. Nerdhair and then Lutz, you're both in line.
Okay, so do you see Akash as an effective replacement for something more along the lines of S3 than necessarily like an EC2 thing? I mean, you could certainly use it for that, but is it a good fit? Just static file serving, that sort of thing? Because I'm thinking about this from a security perspective, trying to come up with ways to actually do digital signature verification on the client. And the problem with doing that is that you can't verify digital signatures on data that you haven't computed yet, right? So if it's less compute and more like storage and serving, is it still a good fit?
I think it depends.
You-
If
you
you're a
can-
trading platform, then yeah, and you need to. I'm trying to understand the use case you're talking about, frankly. Like for instance, if you needed to do real-time encoding, then use Akash. Frankly, I think there's better solutions out there for static data storage. But if you need to do processing, that's kind of our jam.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, Lutz. If you got a question, I think you're the last one in line here. We don't hear you if you're talking, though, unfortunately. I see your mic's unmuted, but I'm not hearing you at all. Nope, still don't hear you. I'm not sure what's going on. I can tell he's trying to talk. Try bringing him back up to stage real fast. There we go. Now we hear you.
All right. Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Luke. Is it possible to use IPFS for some of that storage? You know, like use more decentralized things. You know, have you guys ever seen Neos?
Absolutely. So, we have examples on our documentation of people backing up Postgres databases that are running Akash to kind of some of these decentralized file storage systems. So, absolutely. I mean, really, that's there's S3, there's static files in the EC2 for compute. Really, we're like the EC2 and the file storage systems, or I guess we really aren't aiming to be a static file server. We're aiming for compute. But there's what's great is that there are so many blockchain systems existing and coming online that offer some all the decentralization attributes of Akash. So it's a really good pairing of Akash with some of these.
Yeah, so we have a lot of community members that use Skynet or Saya or RV to store their data and process that data on Akash, right? For example, you can have a MySQL database and a PHP server, running on Akash, but back it up onto a Skynet or IPFS or a RV system. And when you're restoring the data, you can restore from that point. So it doesn't really matter what Akash server you're running; you can still get the benefit of decentralized storage and decentralized compute.
Awesome, great question. Awesome. Well, I think we're a little bit past the hour. Really appreciate Greg and Adam, both of you coming and spending so much time with us in the community and answering so many good, detailed questions. I think really helps all of us get a better understanding of Akash and its capabilities. I know some of our devs are super interested already and diving in and seeing what's possible. And I really just look forward to seeing how things develop and the ability for the DAO to rely more and more on a decentralized service like Akash. It's just a really exciting thing.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for having us. This has been a really great discussion. I'm really excited to see where you guys go, and really would love to help you guys look more into Akash or even other systems, you guys. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg or Willie, anything you want to say before we sign off and close the stage?
Thank you guys for joining us. Looking forward to continuing the discussion, and definitely will be following Akash closely. Glad that Highlander's going to get his hands dirty and play around with it. I think it's a great next step.
Awesome. Sounds great. Cool guys. Talk
Thank you,
soon. Bye now.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks everyone, and thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, great community call, and everyone have a great evening or morning, wherever you are. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks.